The study smelled of ancient leather, aged paper, and the sharp, metallic tang of the king's preferred vintage. I had been ghost in this house of shadows for 7 years, moving through the halls like air present, but beneath the notice of the immortals who dwelt here. That's the reality of serving in an estate like Dracula's. You learn to exist without existing, to breathe without disturbing the centuries-old dust that settles on artifacts older than your family line. My hands scrub bloodstains from marble floors that have witnessed empires fall, arrange velvet curtains heavy enough to block out the sun completely, and polish silver candelabras that catch moonlight like captured stars. The Dracula's estate sprawls across ancient grounds on the edge of the city, all Gothic spires and shadowed corridors and windows that overlook a world moving at a speed the immortal residents will never need to match. Dracula himself is a presence I've learned to anticipate. I hear his footsteps in the vaulted halls, silent, impossible, and know to be already gone. I catch glimpses of him through arched doorways, hair dark as a raven's wing slicked back with timeless precision, formal attire that belongs to a dozen different centuries at once, and eyes like frozen embers that look through me as if I'm made of morning mist. He holds counsel with beings whose shadows move wrong and whose voices carry the weight of forgotten languages. I clean up after them, collect chalices still warm from something that isn't wine, straighten cushions that smell of earth and night-blooming roses. I don't ask questions. That's not my place. My place is to be invisible. The life debt is the chain that keeps me here, an invisible shackle more binding than iron. My mother was dying when I was 16, her body failing in ways the doctors called irreversible. Dracula appeared at her bedside like death's shadow-made gentleman, and he offered a trade, her life for my service. 20 years of sanctuary work, he said. 20 years of keeping his estate pristine, his secrets buried, his existence undisturbed. I signed with my blood, literally, and my mother woke the next morning with color in her cheeks and decades added back to her life. I've served 7 of those 20 years. 13 more to go. The other servants whisper about me when they think I can't hear. The debt girl, they call me. The living interest. They don't understand that I'm grateful for the burden. My mother laughs now. She travels. She lives. That's worth any amount of invisibility, any number of nights spent scrubbing stone floors while creatures of nightmare discuss territory disputes in rooms I'm not supposed to understand. I've learned the rhythms of this house like a heartbeat. The king rises at dusk, his presence filling the estate like a sudden drop in temperature. He reads in the library, writes in his study with a fountain pen that predates the printing press, occasionally receives visitors who arrive in cars worth more than my childhood home. I move around him like water around stone, essential but unremarked upon. That's how it's supposed to be. That's how it was, until the night I stayed too late running errands in the city. Until the rain started falling and the alley turned silver with more than just water. Until hands that were too cold and eyes that burned too bright surrounded me, and a voice like poisoned honey whispered, "You belong to the king? Then let's send him a message written in your veins." The rogue coven didn't just beat me. They marked me. Silver-based poison pumped into my bloodstream, designed to turn Dracula's only source of pure sustenance into a weapon against him. I felt it spread like frozen fire through my body, felt my blood corrupt itself from the inside out. When I stumbled back to the estate at dawn, bruised and bleeding and poisoned, I thought I could hide it. I thought if I just kept my head down, kept working, kept being invisible, maybe he wouldn't notice. Maybe the poison would fade. Maybe I could still be useful. I was so terribly wrong. Because when Dracula found me in the library that evening, my hands, still trembling, polished the dark wood of the desk to a mirror shine, carefully avoiding the stacks of documents that dictated the life and death of the city. I heard his footsteps, measured, deliberate, and silent in a way no human could mimic. I should have been elsewhere. "You're working late," the voice rumbled, low and close. I turned, the thick layer of concealer on my face feeling like a cracking mask. Dracula, the vampire king, stood in the doorway, his silk shirt sleeves rolled to his elbows, his eyes the color of aged whiskey and ancient hunger. "Finishing the library organization, my lord," I whispered, keeping my head bowed. "I can come back later." "What happened to your face?" The question landed like a physical blow. I offered the lie I had rehearsed in the rain. I fell. The subway stairs were slick. He didn't move, but the air in the room grew heavy, suffocating. He crossed the space between us in 3 blurred steps, closing the door behind him with a click that felt like a tomb ceiling. "Look at me." I lifted my face, letting him see the grotesque palette of purple and black that no amount of human makeup could truly hide. His jaw hardened. He didn't see a clumsy girl, he saw a desecration of his property. "Tell me again how you fell." "The stairs. Don't lie to me again, Elena." His fingers, ice-cold and terrifyingly gentle, brushed my jaw, turning my head toward the light. "You're favoring your left side. You're breathing in shallow hitches because your ribs are shattered." Before I could protest, he reached for my sleeve. I hesitated, but his patience was as infinite as his power. I pushed up the fabric, revealing the spectacular, finger-shaped bruises circling my bicep where the men had held me down in the dirt. "Who did this to you?" His voice dropped to a level that was cold and deadly. "They saw the logo on my uniform," I confessed, my voice cracking as the memory of the alley returned, the rain, the laughter, and the way they mocked his name. "They said it was a message for you. They said the king was getting soft." The silence that followed was absolute, heavy, and suffocating. Dracula's eyes didn't just burn, they turned to stone. "They attacked you because you work in my home, in my territory, on my street," he said, his voice a promise of slaughter. "They thought to use your mortality to mock my crown. That makes it personal." He turned toward the desk, his hand curling into a fist. "Franco. To my study. Now." I reached out, a fool's gesture. "Please, it was just a mugging." "It was a challenge," he snapped, the predator finally surfacing. "I have noticed you for 8 months, Elena. I know how you water the orchids because they need consistent care. I know the weight of the debt you carry for a mother the heavens couldn't save." He stepped back toward me, his thumb tracing the edge of the bruise on my cheekbone. "Tonight, you are under my roof and my protection. Accept it." "What will you do to them?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. But I think the right question is, do you? I thought as much. Well, there is only one way to find out. Hit subscribe and let's start from where it all began. The rain started just as I left the apothecary, 3 streets too far from the estate's protective wards. I should have noticed the way it caught the streetlights wrong, turning the droplets into something that looked like liquid mercury. I should have felt the shift in the air, the way the shadows between buildings grew teeth. But I was thinking about the king's order, wolfsbane and nightshade, specific measurements, delivered before moonrise. And by the time I realized I wasn't alone in the alley, it was already too late. They moved like smoke given form, 3 figures that materialized from the darkness between one heartbeat and the next. The woman in front wore a smile that was all predator, her eyes reflecting the streetlight with an amber glow that marked her as something other. Not as old as Dracula. Not as refined. But old enough to be dangerous. "The debt girl," she purred, and the 2 males flanking her laughed like broken glass. "We've been watching you." Watching him. The great Dracula, so careful, so controlled. But every king has a weakness. I backed toward the brick wall, the apothecary package clutched against my chest like a shield. "I'm no one. I'm just his food source." She moved faster than my eyes could track, suddenly close enough that I could smell the decay beneath her perfume. His perfect little blood bag. Pure. Untainted. Exactly what an ancient like him needs to maintain his power. Her hand shot out, fingers wrapping around my throat and lifting me off my feet. The package fell, glass vials shattering against wet pavement, releasing the bitter scent of herbs into the rain. I clawed at her wrist, but it was like trying to move stone. "What happens," she whispered, bringing me close enough to see the black veins webbing across her sclera, "when we poison the well?" The male on her left produced a syringe filled with liquid that glowed faint silver even in the dim light. I thrashed, but the 3rd vampire caught my arm, wrenching it straight with casual brutality. The needle pierced the crook of my elbow, and for a moment there was nothing but the cold pressure of invasion. Then the fire started. Silver burned through my veins like frozen lightning, spreading from the injection site in waves of agony. I heard myself screaming, the sound echoing off brick and pavement. The female vampire released my throat and I collapsed into a puddle that hissed where my blood-tinged rainwater touched the ground. "Tell your king," she said, crouching beside me, her hand fisting in my hair to force my face up, "that the Crimson Court remembers what he took from us. Tell him his sanctuary is built on bones that want to come home." Her fist connected with my cheekbone, snapping my head sideways. Once, twice, 3 times. I tasted copper, felt my lip split, the skin around my eye already swelling. But worse than the physical damage was the poison spreading through me, corrupting my blood cell by cell, turning what should sustain the king into something that would destroy him. They left me there in the silver rain, broken and marked and toxic, a message written in bruises and contaminated veins. I made it back to the estate just before dawn, slipping through the servants' entrance like a thief in my own workplace. The silver poison had settled into a constant, grinding ache beneath my skin, a wrongness that pulsed with every heartbeat. My reflection in the hallway mirror showed exactly what I'd feared. The left side of my face was a canvas of purple and black, my eye swollen nearly shut, my split lip crusted with dried blood. I looked like something discarded. Something broken. The thought that paralyzed me wasn't the pain. It was the calculation running through my mind like ice water. If Dracula discovered my blood was poisoned, what use was I? The life debt required me to serve for 20 years, but it didn't specify that I had to remain his food source. That had been an unspoken arrangement, a convenience that elevated me slightly above the other servants. Without it, I was just another mouth to feed, another body taking up space in his immortal household. Worse, I was a liability. Poisoned blood in a vampire's sanctuary. A contaminated well in a house built on sustenance and power. He would discard me. Send me away. And my mother's borrowed time would come due with interest I couldn't begin to calculate. I scrubbed my face in the servants' bathroom, biting back whimpers as the water hit broken skin. The bruises wouldn't hide, but I could at least look less like I'd crawled out of a gutter. I changed into a fresh uniform, the high collar doing nothing to disguise the fingerprint bruises on my throat. My hands shook as I fastened the buttons. The estate was quiet in the way it always was before dusk, that held-breath stillness of a place waiting for its master to wake. I moved through my duties mechanically, dusting the library, arranging fresh flowers in the entry hall, checking that the heavy curtains were properly sealed against any potential sunlight. Every movement sent silver fire through my veins, but I kept my face blank, my pace steady. I could hide this. I had to hide this. The other servants noticed immediately. Cook took one look at my face and gasped, but I waved her off with a story about falling on the rain-slick stairs near the apothecary. She didn't believe me, I could see it in her eyes, but she was smart enough not to push. In a house like this, you learned when to look away. The real test would come at dusk. Dracula fed from me twice weekly, always in his study, always with the formal courtesy of a gentleman from a more gracious age. He would know. The moment his lips touched my skin, he would taste the corruption, feel the silver poisoning every cell. I spent the day constructing lies. Perhaps I could claim illness. Perhaps I could suggest he feed from one of the blood donors in the city. Perhaps I could simply avoid him until the poison worked itself out of my system, if it ever did. By the time the sun began its descent, I'd positioned myself in the furthest wing of the estate, scrubbing floors that didn't need scrubbing, making myself invisible in the way I'd perfected over 3 years. But you can't hide from a predator who's learned your scent. I thought I had until midnight. That's when he usually summoned me to his study, the routine so established I could set a clock by it. But the king's routines only existed until they didn't, and I'd forgotten that predators don't follow patterns when they sense something wrong. I was in the library, high on a ladder reaching for a volume that had gathered dust on the uppermost shelf, when I felt the temperature drop. Not gradually, all at once, as if winter had walked through the door wearing evening clothes. My hand froze mid-reach, every instinct screaming danger in a language older than words. "Elena." His voice came from directly below me, and I nearly lost my grip on the ladder. I hadn't heard him enter. Hadn't heard footsteps or the whisper of fabric or the door opening. He was simply there, as if he'd materialized from shadow itself. "My lord." I kept my face turned toward the shelves, praying the dim library lighting would hide what the morning had done to me. I was just. Come down. It wasn't a request. I descended slowly, buying seconds I didn't have, knowing that the moment I faced him would be the moment everything shattered. My heart hammered against my ribs, and I wondered if he could hear it, if the fear-spiked blood rushing through my veins was already betraying me. When I reached the bottom step, I kept my eyes lowered in the submissive posture I'd perfected. But his hand caught my chin, not roughly, but with an inexorable gentleness that was somehow worse, and tilted my face up into the candlelight. The silence that followed felt like the moment before an execution. His eyes, normally the color of embers barely burning, had gone completely black. Not dark, black, like looking into a void where something ancient and terrible waited. His nostrils flared once, scenting the air, and I watched his expression shift from aristocratic control to something that made my blood freeze despite the silver fire burning through it. "Who?" he said, and his voice was no longer the cultured tenor I'd grown accustomed to. It was the sound of crypts opening, of earth giving up its dead, of every nightmare humanity had ever whispered about in the dark. "Dared to taint your blood?" His thumb traced the edge of my bruised cheekbone with a delicacy that contradicted the rage rolling off him in waves. The air itself seemed to darken, shadows pooling at his feet like loyal hounds awaiting command. His other hand rose to hover near my split lip, not quite touching, as if he feared what he might do if he made contact with the evidence of violence. "I can taste it," he continued, his accent thickening with something older than the English language. "Silver. Alchemy. Old magic twisted into poison." His eyes met mine, and I saw something I'd never witnessed in 3 years of service. Fury so absolute it had transcended emotion and become a force of nature. "They marked you. They corrupted what is mine." The possessiveness in those last words should have frightened me. Instead, pinned under the full weight of his attention, I felt something else entirely. For 3 years, I'd been invisible. Now, I was the only thing he could see. He made me tell him everything. Every detail of the attack, every word the Crimson Court had spoken, every second of silver agony as the poison spread through my veins. His hand never left my face, that gentle touch anchoring me while his expression grew progressively more inhuman. By the time I finished, describing how they'd left me broken in the rain, the shadows in the library had grown so thick I could barely see the shelves. "The Crimson Court," he repeated, and the name on his lips sounded like a death sentence. "They remember what I took from them. How thoughtful." He released my chin, stepping back, and I watched the transformation complete itself. His shoulders squared, his spine straightened, and something that had been carefully restrained for decades, perhaps centuries, finally slipped its leash. "Then let me remind them why I took it in the first place." He moved toward the door with a predator's fluid grace, then paused. "Go to the east balcony, Elena. Watch the city. Understand what happens when lesser creatures touch what belongs to me." I should have refused. Should have begged him not to go, not to start a war over a servant's poisoned blood. But the words died in my throat as he turned his head slightly, giving me his profile in the candlelight, and I saw the truth written in every sharp angle. This wasn't about me. This was about a challenge issued, a line crossed, an ancient law of territorial dominance that predated human civilization. They had struck at his sanctuary, at his source, at his property, however he defined me. The response would be biblical. I climbed to the east balcony as commanded, my body still aching with silver fire, and looked out over the city spread below the estate like a carpet of lights. For several minutes, nothing changed. Then, in the distance, a section of downtown went dark. Not gradually, not like a power outage, all at once, as if something had simply erased the electricity from existence. Another section died. Then another. I watched the darkness spread like spilled ink across the glowing grid, moving with purpose, with direction, following a path only a hunter could see. The Crimson Court had made their lair somewhere in the city's heart, and Dracula was carving a path straight toward it, extinguishing lights like snuffing candles. My breath fogged in the suddenly frigid air. Even from miles away, I could feel the weight of his presence settling over the city like a shroud. Windows shattered in the distance. I saw the tiny sparkles of falling glass catching moonlight. Car alarms began wailing, a discordant symphony of mechanical fear. Somewhere, a building's fire alarm added its voice to the chaos. The city was waking up to find a primordial nightmare loose in its streets. I gripped the balcony railing, watching the destruction unfold with a mixture of horror and something else I couldn't name. He was doing this for me. Because they'd hurt me. Because they'd poisoned me. Because in his ancient, inhuman calculation, my blood belonged to him and they had dared to taint it. The city lights continued to die, one by one, marking his path like breadcrumbs made of darkness. By sunrise, I understood, there would be no Crimson Court left to remember anything. He returned 3 hours before dawn, and I knew immediately that something was wrong. The door to his chambers slammed open hard enough to crack the frame, and I heard the sound of his footsteps, no longer silent and measured but heavy, unsteady. I'd been waiting in the hallway outside, unable to sleep, unable to do anything but pace and worry and watch the city slowly come back to life below. The darkness had retreated an hour ago, lights flickering back on in sections, but the silence that had followed felt ominous. I found him collapsed against his desk, one hand braced on the mahogany surface, his head bowed. His formal coat was gone, his white shirt torn and splattered with something too dark to be wine. As I approached, I saw his hand trembling. Actually trembling, against the wood. "My lord." My voice came out smaller than I intended. He didn't look up. "I told you to stay away." But his voice lacked its usual command, and I saw what he was trying to hide, the gauntness in his face, the way his skin had taken on an almost translucent quality, the fine tremors running through his frame. He looked like a man who'd run a marathon while bleeding out, and I understood with sudden, terrible clarity. "You haven't fed." The accusation came out sharper than I meant. "You've been hunting for hours and you haven't fed. Your blood is poisoned." He finally raised his head, and his eyes had gone from black back to their usual ember color, but they burned with a different kind of fire now, the desperate hunger of starvation. "I won't touch you while the silver remains. There are others, blood donors in the city, the other servants." "No." The word came out as a growl. "Your blood is specific. Rare. I've conditioned myself to it over 3 years. Others taste like ash in comparison, provide barely enough sustenance to matter." He laughed, the sound bitter and raw. A king's palate, grown too refined for his own survival. I watched him struggle to remain upright, pride and hunger warring across his features. The great Dracula, ancient and terrible, brought low not by his enemies but by his refusal to harm the one human he'd claimed as his source. The irony would have been poetic if it wasn't so devastating. "How long?" I asked quietly. "How long can you last without feeding properly?" "Days. Perhaps a week, if I don't exert myself." His smile was all teeth and no humor. "Unfortunately, I just exerted myself considerably. The Crimson Court no longer exists, if you're wondering. Not a single member survived to see sunrise. I kept my vow." "At what cost?" I moved closer, watching him track the movement with those hungry eyes. "You're killing yourself to avenge me." "You say that," he murmured, "as if it's not a fair trade." The vulnerability in those words struck me harder than any physical blow. I reached out, my hand hovering near his face, and made a decision that would change everything. "Then let me help you." His hand caught my wrist before I could touch him, grip iron-strong despite his weakened state. "You don't understand what you're offering. The silver will poison me, weaken me further, possibly kill us both. You're dying anyway." I met his eyes, refusing to look away from the hunger burning there. "At least this way, there's a chance." "Elena." 3 years, I interrupted, and my voice shook but held. 3 years I've served you. 3 years you've taken my blood with courtesy and distance, treating me like a resource to be managed. But you just turned a city into a graveyard because someone hurt me. You're starving yourself because you won't risk causing me more pain. I stepped closer, close enough to feel the unnatural cold radiating from him. "So stop pretending I'm just your food source and take what you need." Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition. His thumb traced the pulse point in my wrist, and I felt my heartbeat stutter under his touch. "There is a way," he said slowly, as if weighing each word against centuries of knowledge. "Old magic. Older than the Crimson Court, older than most of my kind remember. I can draw the poison out while I feed filter it through a blood rite that will bind us. His eyes locked onto mine. But understand, this isn't a simple feeding. A rite like this creates a connection. Soul deep. Permanent. You would feel what I feel. Know what I know. There would be no more invisibility, no more distance. You would be mine in a way that transcends the life debt. I should have been terrified. Should have asked for time to consider, to understand the implications. Instead, I tilted my head, exposing the column of my throat in an invitation as old as his kind. Then bind me. He moved faster than thought, one hand sliding into my hair, the other wrapping around my waist, pulling me flush against him. But instead of striking at my throat, his mouth captured mine in a kiss that tasted of darkness and hunger and something desperately close to reverence. I gasped against his lips, and felt the magic activate, a pulling sensation deep in my chest, as if he was drawing something out from my very core. The silver poison responded immediately. I felt it moving through my bloodstream, pulled by his will, gathered by ancient power into a concentrated point. His kiss deepened, became something both more and less than physical, and I understood this was the right. He was literally drawing the corruption out through the connection between us, filtering it through magic that predated written history. Pain lanced through me, sharp and bright, but his arms held me steady. I tasted copper and something sweeter, felt the moment his fangs pierced my lower lip, mixing our blood at the point of contact. The magic flared white-hot, and suddenly I could feel him, his hunger, his rage, his desperate need to protect what he'd claimed as his own. The silver burned away like morning frost under sunlight, and what remained was us, bound together in a way that would never come undone. The bond showed me everything. I saw through his memories like watching a film played at double speed, the hunt through darkened streets, the systematic dismantling of the Crimson Court's network. He'd started at the edges, taking out their scouts and lookouts with surgical precision, leaving bodies drained and broken as breadcrumbs leading back to their lair. The lower-ranked vampires had died quickly, almost mercifully. He'd saved his creativity for the ones who mattered. The warehouse district. That's where he'd found them, in a converted factory that reeked of old blood and older ambitions. The 3 who'd attacked me were there, along with 4 others, the court's inner circle, gathered in emergency session to discuss the audacity of the ancient who dared retaliate for a mere human servant. They'd been arguing when he arrived, their voices sharp with panic barely concealed beneath bravado. The female who'd held me by the throat was insisting they could negotiate, could offer tribute, could claim ignorance of who I truly belonged to. Dracula had given them no chance to speak. Through the bond, I felt the cold calculation as he'd sealed every exit with shadows made solid, trapping them like rats in a cage of their own making. I felt his satisfaction as recognition dawned in their eyes. The moment they understood they weren't dealing with just another territorial vampire lord, but with something that had walked the earth when their grandmothers' grandmothers were still human. "You wanted to send a message," he'd said, his voice echoing in the cavernous space. "Let me show you how a king delivers his reply." The male who'd held the syringe died first. Dracula had torn him apart slowly, methodically, making sure the others watched as he reduced their companion to screaming pieces. Not feeding, just destroying, proving that this wasn't about sustenance or even territory. This was about the principle of ownership, about the cost of touching what belonged to him. The second male had tried to run, forgetting that the exits were sealed. Dracula had let him reach the door, let hope blossom in his chest, before appearing behind him and snapping his spine in 3 places. He'd left him paralyzed on the floor, listening to the sounds of his companions dying, knowing his turn would come. The others had begged. Offered information, offered allegiance, offered everything they possessed. He'd listened to each plea with the patience of something that had heard every possible variation over centuries, then dismissed them with the same consideration they'd shown me in that rain-soaked alley. None. The female who'd mocked me, who'd smiled as she poisoned my blood and split my lip, he'd saved her for last. Through the bond, I felt him force her to drink the very silver poison she'd used on me, watching as it burned through her system while he explained, in exquisite detail, exactly what he was going to do to anyone else who mistook his restraint for weakness. She was still screaming when he tore out her throat. By the time the first rays of sunlight touched the warehouse windows, the Crimson Court had been reduced to ash and memory. His vow, fulfilled completely. He held me for hours after the rite, both of us collapsed on the floor of his study like survivors of a shipwreck. The bond hummed between us, a living thing that carried his exhaustion and my wonder in equal measure. I could feel him feeding properly now, drawing sustenance from blood finally purified of silver corruption, and the relief that flooded through him was almost overwhelming. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough and used. "This changes everything." I didn't need to ask what he meant. The bond made pretense impossible. I could feel his thoughts brushing against mine, taste the edges of concerns he'd carried for longer than I'd been alive. "You're a liability now," he continued, and I felt him wince internally at the harshness of the words even as he spoke them. "Not because of the poison. Because of what you've become to me. The Crimson Court saw it before I fully acknowledged it myself. You're not just my food source. You're the crack in my armor. The weakness every enemy will exploit." I pushed myself upright, my body still aching but no longer burning with silver fire. "So what are you saying? That I should leave? That the life debt?" "The life debt is irrelevant." He sat up as well, and in the pre-dawn darkness I saw him clearly for the first time since the rite, not as the untouchable king I'd served for 3 years, but as something far more complex. "I'm saying that as long as you remain human, you remain fragile. Mortal. Vulnerable to every creature who wants to wound me through you." His hand cupped my bruised cheek with devastating gentleness. "And there are many who want exactly that." Understanding hit me like a physical blow. "You want to turn me. I want to give you a choice." His thumb traced the edge of my split lip, the wound already healing faster than it should, probably an effect of the rite. "Your mother's debt is paid. I declared it so the moment I tasted silver in your blood. You're free to leave, to live out your mortal years however you choose. I won't stop you." Something ancient and lonely flickered through the bond. "But if you stay, if you remain in my world, you need to be able to survive it. The dark gift would make you immortal. Powerful. Untouchable by lesser creatures who think poisoning a human is an adequate strategy." "I'd be a vampire." The word felt strange on my tongue, too real, too immediate. "You'd be my equal." He leaned closer, his forehead resting against mine in a gesture almost unbearably intimate. "My partner. My queen, if you'll accept the title. No more invisibility. No more scrubbing floors and hiding bruises. No more watching from the shadows while I shape the world around us." His voice dropped to a whisper. "But also no more sunlight. No more human warmth. No more natural death at the end of a full life. It's not a gift I offer lightly, Elena. It's a curse as much as a blessing." Through the bond, I felt what he wouldn't say aloud, the desperate hope, the fear of rejection, the loneliness of centuries finally finding something worth keeping. I thought about my mother, alive and laughing because a monster made a deal in the darkness. I thought about 3 years of invisibility, of scrubbing bloodstains and polishing silver and pretending I didn't exist. I thought about the rain-soaked alley, the silver poison, the casual cruelty of creatures who saw me as nothing more than a message to be delivered in bruises and broken blood. Then I thought about the way Dracula had looked at me in the library, the fury in his eyes when he saw what they'd done. The way he'd turned a city into a hunting ground, starved himself rather than cause me more pain, bound his soul to mine through ancient magic just to save my life. I thought about the bond humming between us, showing me centuries of loneliness, of watching everything he cared about crumble to dust while he remained, eternal and untouched and utterly alone. The choice wasn't difficult. It had stopped being difficult the moment his hand caught my chin in the library and he'd asked who dared to taint my blood. "Make me immortal," I whispered against his lips. "Make me your queen. Make me something that can stand beside you instead of in your shadow." The relief that flooded through the bond nearly knocked me breathless. He pulled back just enough to meet my eyes, searching for doubt, for hesitation, for any sign I didn't understand the magnitude of what I was choosing. Whatever he saw must have satisfied him, because he nodded once, slowly. "It will hurt," he warned. "The transformation, it's not gentle. Your body will die and be reborn into something else. Something other." I've already been poisoned with silver and survived. I managed to smile despite the fear coiling in my stomach. "How much worse can it be?" His laugh was soft and sad. "You'll find out." He struck quickly, mercifully, his fangs piercing the junction of my throat and shoulder. But this wasn't the careful, measured feeding I'd grown accustomed to. This was draining, a systematic emptying of everything that made me human. I felt my heartbeat slow, felt the world grow distant and cold, felt my life slipping away like water through cupped hands. Just before everything went dark, he bit his own wrist and pressed it to my lips. "Drink," he commanded. "Drink and be reborn." The taste of his blood was nothing like I'd imagined, not copper or salt, but something rich and complex and filled with power that sang through my dying cells like electricity. I drank desperately, instinctively, feeling the dark gift take root in my chest like a seed planted in fertile soil. The pain came next, exactly as he'd promised. My body convulsed as it died and reformed, bones reshaping, senses sharpening, humanity burning away like morning mist. I screamed, and the sound shattered every window in the study. When I finally opened my eyes, the world had been reborn in shades of crystal clarity. I could hear heartbeats from rooms away, smell the approach of dawn, feel the weight of centuries settling into my bones like a birthright finally claimed. Dracula knelt beside me, and for the first time, we met as equals. "Welcome to eternity, my queen."